Thank you all for being here. Yeah, this is Chris kind of mentioned this is one of the questions I get asked probably more than anything in any tours. Do deer eat it? And, the answer is probably yes. There's an awful lot of things that deer will eat, and as the pressure gets greater and greater, deer are going to eat more and more things that we're trying to grow. But there are a lot of things that are deer resistant. Nobody wants to say deer proof about anything. I've made that mistake before, and every time I say it, there's a bunch of hands that will go up in the audience, and I know they're going to say, the deer ain't mine. So there does seem to be kind of this phenomena where in one area, deer will not touch something, and you'll go somewhere else, and another population of deer will eat whatever it is that they've just picked up different tastes. And I don't know why that is, but it does seem to be the case. So I'm going to try and talk about things that overall are generally considered pretty deer resistant. And there is a lot of things. Quite honestly, we could go within about 10 or 20 feet of this building and platform and do an entire tour of deer resistant plants right here. There are a couple of things that you can kind of bank on. Palms. Deer don't eat palms. I don't know that anything since the dinosaurs were around eat palms. Most ornamental grasses, deer don't eat. Most, I won't say all, most deer would generally stay away from. Ferns, generally, basically, pretty much all ferns are pretty deer resistant. Deer has to be really pretty desperate to eat ferns, which is interesting because that's a plant that the fiddleheads people actually eat. Generally, if we eat it, deer will eat it as well. Another generality is if it's got spiky, tough, leathery leaves, deer will generally eat those second. Say mahonia and things like that. But as we make mahonias, more and more user-friendly, like soft caress, because nice soft foliage without the spines. My guess is if deer get hungry enough, they're going to go after that before they go after some of the old leather leaf mahonias. So feel free to ask questions as we go through. Feel free to as I'm talking about plants, to inject your experiences, because it really is, it always seems like deer will eat something that I'm thinking is deer resistant, and they'll eat it in your yard. So please, let us know your experiences, because that's always helpful as well. All right. I did this, and we could walk around. I thought there might be a big group, so I tried to stay in areas where I could talk to larger groups as I decided on plants. And I did some out here in the brick circle, and usually we don't have a lot of traffic through here, but I forgot that we were dropping off summer camp, so we'll have to watch out and make sure we don't get run over. And we'll ask y'all as we go through to try and stay out of the beds. I'll try and be in areas where we can all gather around. If you can't hear me, tell me to speak up, and I will do my best. Yeah, I wanted to put at least one vine on here. Vines, a lot of them, the more vigorous woody vines tend to be fine with deer, even if deer like them. Once you get them up high enough, they're not gnawing on the stems, so you can get them up. This is Bignonia, or was it crossvine?
Crossvine.
I never, the common names Bignonia and crossvine and trumpet creeper always get confused. Bignonia, this Bignonia caprulata. All right, somebody help me out with this, because I first learned it as Jekyll, and then is that right? It's for Jekyll Island off of Georgia.
Deer was bicycling on Jekyll Island when he discovered it.
Yeah, for a while I got in my head that it was something from Gertrude Jekyll and was named for her, and so for years in my head it's Jekyll, and now I can't remember which one is which. I know it's one. So it's from Jekyll Island, and typically crossvine has big tubular orange-red flowers. This Jekyll has really orange flowers. I really like the color better than the orange red. The orange red is kind of a harsh color. This orange with a yellow throat is much nicer. It's heavy flowering form. We had it for years on the front of our lath house until we renovated and rebuilt the lath house, and it's really spectacular when in flower. It is a vigorous grower. It will. It's not, for a small structure. We've got it on 8x8s. That's pretty good, solid structure for it. It flowers in the spring, so you can cut it back after it flowers, and it'll grow enough and flower and set buds to flower the next year, unless you cut it back to the ground. It really, like a lot of flowering vines, starts flowering best once it gets up and starts going horizontal on something. A lot of vines, when they're going vertical, they stay mostly with foliage growth. They're trying to get up, because the reason vines do that is they get up to the tops of trees and then they get light and they flower, and that's where the insects, the pollinators and things are. So if you're worried about your vine because you're growing it up a post and it's not flowering, get it going horizontal and it'll do a whole lot better, really start flowering for you. So a lot of times people say it's at a certain height. It generally isn't. It's just that they're watching it grow up before it grows out. And once it does that, it'll be really nice. And when it starts cascading down, that part usually flowers really well as well. So let me do that. Full sun for best flowering. You can grow it in a little bit more shade, but your flowering will be decreased, but it'll still grow pretty quickly, trying to get to where there is some sun. Any questions about it? All right. Okay, right beside me here, another little guy, another plant. It's a boxwood. And now people will, wait, boxwoods are not deer resistant. Deer love boxwoods. Well, deer do eat a lot of boxwoods, although that's one of those plants that's kind of iffy. Some places it seems like deer don't touch boxwoods, and other places they really do. But in terms of boxwoods, if you're going to grow boxwoods and you have deer issues, the Japanese boxwoods, Buxus microphylla, which tend to be smaller plants than the common boxwood, are much more deer resistant than the Buxus sempervirens and some of the other species. So this is one called Franklin's Gem, which is a real cold hardy form, which doesn't mean a whole lot for us, but it makes a low mound, very small leaves on this form of microphylla, which means small leaf anyway. Grows to about 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide or so. Has a nice green color during the summer. It goes kind of olive green during the winter, but doesn't, some of them get kind of brownish during the winter. This one really doesn't. It's been a good grower for us. It's in a pretty tough spot here for us. It's surrounded by concrete and kind of the edge of a bed. A lot of times that can be tough, but it seems to do well. Boxwoods are understory plants, and they actually are happiest with a bit of shade, not out in blazing full sun, which is where we typically think of them. They will a lot of times loosen up a little bit in the shade, but these little tight dwarf microphylla types like Franklin's Gem typically will stay pretty tight. Probably unsurprisingly, agaves are pretty good deer resistant plants. Pretty tough to eat something that you can't bite through or that has spines that will injure you. We don't think about them necessarily when we're thinking about a deer resistant landscape, but agaves are wonderful for that. This is Agave asperima. It was for many years commonly known as Agave scabra, but the old name, it got two names early on, and the taxonomists duked it out over which was correct. Scabra was probably more widely used, but asperima in the end won out. You probably don't care about the taxonomy. Think of it as rough leaf agave. Agave scabra. Scabra is for scabrous, which is kind of like rough sandpapery texture. So a lot of agaves, if you feel them, they're smooth. This is really rough. So it's one of the parents of some of the real popular ones like shark skin and shark skin shoes, because it's got that rough texture. Agave in general They want well-drained soils. We all know that. We think of them as desert plants, but they actually really like moisture as long as they're well-drained. So if you give them perfect drainage and irrigate them, they will grow at 2 to 3 to 4 times the rate that that other agaves will grow.
How old is that plant?
I can do this without poking my eye out. So we got this in 2001, almost certainly as a quart pot, but it probably sat in the nursery for years. It may have come in as seed, actually. I'm not sure. I didn't look it up, but it did sit, you know, kind of in the nursery. Or probably even more likely, it came in 2001, was planted in the xeric garden, and this is an offset that we moved. I'd have to look back at our records to see. But you know, if you give them, you really give them a lot of water, they will go pretty quickly. And we get a lot of water here anyway, so if you plant them in a well-drained spot like this, they grow quickly. When they do flower, which it takes them around here for this species, probably 15 to 25 years to flower in the garden. If you really push them, maybe a little bit quicker. They'll put up a really tall spike, looks like a shoot of asparagus that's going up, and then it will have kind of candelabra tiers of yellow flowers, really quite pretty. And then the main plant will die that flowers. But as you can see, this species offsets very readily, so that's not generally a problem. They will grow in a little bit of shade. They're happiest in full sun. They'll grow in a touch of shade though, but again, you still want well-drained soils. Yeah, the roots on a larger agave, they can go down pretty far and spread out pretty wide. They can be tough to dig out once they get to be a pretty good size.
Well, you know, like trees that say that what's up here is down here.
That's false. Don't listen to anybody who tells you that.
Okay, but like
90%, let me just go, 90% of our tree roots are in the top 3 feet of the soil, and about 75 to 80% are in the top 12 inches of soil. So tree roots go out like a pancake. They don't go down deep generally. There are occasional trees that'll go more deep, but still most of the roots are out.
do you have a guess as to like we're looking at this much plant, how much root is down here?
Not a real good, like I don't know how wide agave roots spread out. I gotta say I don't know, I haven't dug enough of them to really have a good sense of really how their roots go. They tend to have thick roots. I did dig one 10-foot one, and we could not dig it by hand. We tried, and we wound up having to bring in a bobcat and dig it out.
I just think like soil and trying to figure out how much for drainage.
Okay, so if you're starting with clay soil, your best bet is to till it up, put in a good bit of amendments, till that in, and then mound up with a well-drained amended soil. Don't plant them flat in clay, even well-amended clay. You want to get them up on a slope or on a mound, really, for best results. Yes?
Do you have a catalog of every plant in the place and know exactly what the history is? I mean, can you look it up?
Yes. You know, there are a few things from really early on that we don't have good records on, but yeah, so there are a couple things that kind of fall in that category. We have a booklet that we sell inside for basically what it costs us to make it, $8. That is everything that is planted in the Arboretum as of when that was printed, and we usually do it, twice a year? We just did one, so we have a real recent one. Online, you can go to on our website, you can go to the horticulture tab and then click on our plants, and there's a search. You can search for any kind of plant. Like if you want to know all the agaves, you can type in agave. If you leave it blank and just hit search, you'll get a whole list, I think, right? Yeah. Chris takes care of that.
It'll take a while to load, but you'll get it.
Yes, because it's got a picture with each one, so and some information about it, like when we got the plant, if that's in there. So you can do that. And then we have, where that information comes from internally, we have information about every plant that has a little more in depth about source and just all kinds of different information that we store in there.
The online database will have the date planted, the size it was planted, last height measured.
Right.
If you click on the big number, it'll bring up a map of the Arboretum dates on it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a real powerful tool, and that's all Chris.
Another general question. Do you guys get a lot of deer here in the Arboretum?
We have, in the 10 years I've been here, we have had deer exactly once. And they didn't stay around. As a mother and fawn, they were coming in the back of the horticulture field lab, and they came in a couple times and left. So no, we do not have deer pressure here.
If you did, would you try to get rid of them?
Well, yeah, but it's difficult because we have a 4-foot fence around parts of the Arboretum and 5-foot fence around others, and deer will jump 8 feet pretty easily to get into an area, and this would be a pretty nice area for them. Other than we're not that big, and we do have an awful lot of people through here at certain times, so they wouldn't stay in here. But if you get a herd that's coming in and going, they will do that, and they are smarter than you think. My first real experience with deer issues was at a field lab when I was in college. And we kept having to help string up, we had electric tape around a research plot. The whole area was fenced in, but there was a big herd of deer within this big area. But so this research plot, we put up electric tape around the whole thing, and it kept getting broken, the top bit of it. And what was happening were the deer were just jumping through it, and get shocked if you're not on the ground when you're touching electric fencing. You got to be grounded to something. And so they were just jumping through, and we saw them doing it, and so and they seemed to be learning. This was up in the mountains, and they did get rid of them, and a lot of hunting up there. A lot of the faculty hunted, and apparently the deer were learning. They just kept having that problem even when they were getting rid of the deer that were doing it. So okay, next one is rosemary. Deer tend to avoid really aromatic plants, so a lot of herbs are great. If you've got a sunny garden, rosemary is a fantastic one. Not only are the leaves kind of thick and tough, but it's also very aromatic. Those aromatic oils tend to keep the deer from grazing on them. This is a form called barbecue, which is a very upright form. It kind of sold me a bill of goods when I got it. It was like it was going to be a column of rosemary. It's not. I don't know that it's that much different than a lot of other ones, but it does tend to have longer shoots that are upright, and they call it barbecue because the way they market this, you can cut off this stem and use it as a skewer, and your meat gets all that great rosemary flavor. Then you just pull it out, and your shish kebab's done. I don't know how many people actually do that, but it does make it easy to cut off a piece and use it, throw it in a pot for a stew or whatever. Rosemary are very tough. They want full sun. They want very well drained soils, and they'll flower generally during the winter. This has not been an outstanding one for flowers for us so far. You can see the way it's leaning and it's full out here where it's sun. It does not like being shaded at all. Rosemary will get leggy over time. If you let them grow up and then try and cut them back hard, they generally will die. You want to keep them trimmed back when they're young. You don't want to go too far back in the stems, definitely not beyond where you've got good leaves on there. They're not like conifers, where if conifers, if they have one little sprig back there, you can really cut back to that green part and it will flush out. These, my experience for us here, is if you cut them back that hard, even if there's a few leaves down there, they just never really recover. I tend to think of rosemary as relatively short-lived shrubs. I've seen some really old ones around here, and they're usually really ugly, and I keep thinking, why don't you just get rid of it? They don't have really deep roots and are pretty easy to get rid of, and just plant a new one. I mean, they're not expensive. You can generally I mean, they're selling them at, outside the front of Whole Foods for a few bucks. Just get a new one and plant it. Don't try and keep it forever. I love them. It's one of my favorite fragrances in the garden. So I like to have one planted near my front door where I'm walking in and out of the house, so I can smell it. I've always said that I've never had enough sun. I have a house now with enough sun, and I actually have a garage I can park in, so I don't get to walk by my rosemary that I planted out there. Oh well. Questions about rosemaries or others?
I have it with discoloration of the leaf. I understand it's an insect or something.
Yeah, there's some sucking insects that'll get in there and kind of get the leaves will kind of get lightish colored, brownish colored, and stippled. I'm not sure right off the top of my head what it is that does that. I generally just go in there and trim it back a little bit, throw it all away, let it reflush, and it's usually fine. It would take a lot of them to kill the plant. And since I like to use it for cooking, I wouldn't spray anything on it. You could do some like Safer's products. It's not Safer's anymore. They were bought. And I can't remember what it is.
Insecticide or something.
An insecticidal soap, yeah. But that insect is a sucking insect, so you gotta kind of hit it. There are a lot of it's easy when you think about rosemaries and agaves and things like that. That's not surprising, but there are an awful lot of plants, and a lot of our native plants are fairly well adapted to be pretty deer resistant. This is fothergilla. Fothergilla is a really nice native shrub that is deer resistant. There are a few different species now. They've just been recently described a new species from down in Alabama. This is a hybrid fothergilla called Redneck Nation from Alabama. Fothergillas will flower in early spring. All the stems will be topped with a little small kind of rounded bottle brush-like flowers, really nice honey-scented flowers. I like them, they're really pretty. Then when they're happy, they have this beautiful foliage like this, and then they get great fall color. Really good plants for fall color. They naturally grow in heavy shade in woodlands, but they often don't grow as shrubs when you see them out in the wild. There'll be like one little stem, and then it'll sucker, and there'll be one little stem topped with a little flower. They're really, I always wondered why I'd never seen a fothergilla in the wild, and it wasn't until somebody pointed it out that I realized that it's because I was looking for this and not the small thing. They actually do well in more sun. They'll be fuller and denser and shrubbier plant, but they will take shade, and in the garden they tend to be shrubs. The couple species, there's Fothergilla major, which is a larger plant, bigger leaves, and Fothergilla gardeniae, which is smaller. And then there's a new species that is basically visibly pretty much identical to Fothergilla gardeniae. The hybrids between the two tend to be the best plants for us. Fothergilla exmedia. I'm actually not sure what the parentage behind this one is. It could be with that new species, so we just leave it as Fothergilla. This has been one of the best ones for us in terms of just looking good in the garden. It's been denser than a lot of them. It's grown really well, so I'm really impressed with this one. We'll probably be propagating this one and trying to get it out because I think it's a great plant. And deer tend to steer away from Fothergilla, which is a nice feature for a plant like this. It is in the witch hazel family, and witch hazels are another group of plants that tend to be deer resistant. I can't say that I've ever remember seeing them eat or hearing about them eating Coralopsis, which is also in that family. So maybe that's a family that is good to look at. I know they don't eat sweet gums, and kind of wish they would. Any questions about?
Has that one been trimmed?
Has not been trimmed. No. Just grows like this. And I saw it recently at a rest stop. It's somewhere between here and Georgia. I can't remember where, but they had Fothergilla as a clipped hedge, about this big, and I mean it was full and dense and gorgeous. and which I'd never seen fothergilla used that way. I was really impressed with that, and also kind of impressed that they were using a deciduous shrub for a hedge, because you don't see that in the U.S. very much. We got to be evergreen all the time if it's going to be a hedge. That's more of a European, the deciduous hedges as deciduous shrubs as hedges. But you can see it's dense, so if you're clipping it, even in winter, it would be a good presence.
Was the hedge in more sun or just what?
It was in full sun. Yep. Probably was irrigated, but based on my experience with rest stops, irrigation was probably, not working very well. That seems to be the case, but it was beautiful. Another plant for those that, say I can't grow anything in my garden, the deer eat everything. Dogwoods, especially Cornus cusa, the Asian dogwood, tend to be pretty darn deer resistant. Yeah, I see a head shaking. Now, are they eating it or are they rubbing it? Ah, well. Except for in Viv's yard, for a small flowering tree, these tend to be pretty deer resistant. This Cornus cusa is called Summer Fun. Is that right? Summer Gold. Summer Fun's a white variegated. Summer Gold, which is has been touted as one of the most sun tolerant of the variegated ones. You can see sun and drought don't necessarily keep it very happy. That's why we have it planted out where it gets some good afternoon sun to actually test that. Come on through. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't have that leaf curl that you get with a lot of the Cusa dogwoods out when it gets sun, so it stays pretty flat, which is nice. We started putting the irrigation on here, and the new growth is looking cleaner. Does get the nice white flowers in late spring. The other nice thing about Summer Gold is it's a much more upright form of Cornus cusa than some of the other ones. Deer may eat it in your yard too. They eat it in bed. And it's interesting, the reason I asked about whether it was deer rub or deer browse, because there's some plants, a lot of the deciduous magnolias are pretty deer resistant in terms of them eating them, but boy, they love to rub their antlers on the deciduous magnolias. They love to do that. And it's funny, the one that seems to be at the top of their list is one called Judy Zook, which is a very upright yellow one. And I say that from, that's anecdotal, but from several other magnolia folks, they say that that's one that they cannot keep going because of the deer rub on that particular one. And I've grown, it's my favorite deciduous magnolia. I've planted 3 different ones, and every single one has been killed by deer rub, whereas other ones that I've had in my yards have not.
Yellow is the leaves? Yellow is the leaves?
No, yellow is the flower, the gold flowered one.
Because I've often noticed in my yard, if I have a green and a yellow of the same species, that eat the leaves off the variegated or yellow one and leave the green one.
Really?
I don't know if they're more tender with less chlorophyll, but it's true in several species.
That's interesting. As Viv said that she's noticed that where she has a variegated plant and a green plant, they will tend to go to the variegated plant and eat that one first, probably. Which is, I had never heard that, but that's interesting that that's what they do. It could be something that we're modifying by behavior by putting out so many variegated plants and getting them to people. Okay, I mentioned aromatic plants. This little wispy flowered plant in front is Clinopodium, formerly Calamintha. This Clinopodium nepida, subspecies nepida, comes from southern Europe down into the Middle East a bit, Iran, that kind of area. If you rub the foliage, real almost like a spearmint fragrance to it, but it doesn't run all over the place like spearmint does in your garden. It's nice, well-behaved little sub-clumping kind of woody-based perennial. Real easy in the garden with lots of sun, super drought tolerant once it's established. And like with the rosemary, these plants that are really aromatic foliage tend to be pretty deer resistant. right. These are great. They kind of flower for a real long period over summer. Never super showy. Small flowers, and they range from kind of lavender pinky color to white. We have more on the white spectrum. And what I do with these, like a lot of these woody based shrubs, is when it goes dormant, or in late winter, early spring, just give it a little bit of a haircut. Cut down about 6 to 8 inches of growth and kind of round it out, go down below the flowers, and that keeps it going. Cut it back really hard, a lot of times you'll lose them. Our winter wet they're not real used to that. You can see where it gets more sun, it's fuller than where it's a little bit more shaded. The more sun you give it, the better. But I really like the texture in the garden. It's not a knockout flowering plant, but the texture is great. Pollinators love it, that kind of thing. And so, this is a lot of the sages, a lot of the catmints really like it. So keep those in mind, especially if you have sun and a lot of deer. And it can sometimes help when you have these planted, a lot of these planted around some other choice things. They'll just tend to, head over to your neighbor's yard rather than get through there. Same thing with ornamental grasses like Muhlenbergia. If you plant those out around, a lot of times, sometimes deer will just go through and pick the things they like, but a lot of times they'll move on to your neighbors, especially if they have a lot of stuff planted. Give them daylilies and things like that, and let them feed the deer. In prior experience, just by looking at the plant, whether deer would like it or not, I would say deer would love it. The Secretia pallida, this Tradescantia relative, a lot of times there's Purple Heart. There's some different selections of it, but it is something that deer really tend to avoid. And a lot of people actually, if you do a lot of messing with it, the foliage, there's little hairs in the foliage, and the sap can irritate some people if you're cutting back a lot of it or pulling it up. Not everybody, but some people, it really causes them kind of to be itchy and uncomfortable. But deer tend to stay away from it. It's a real succulent plant. You can get it as a house plant, you can get it as a garden plant. As a house plant, it's often touted as being very, you can grow it in low light. And so people put it in the shade in the garden, but it's really much happier in more sun. If you get it in shade, it kind of greens up, and also you get fungal spots on the leaves a lot of times. You get a big patch like this, and where it's shady, you'll see real ugly kind of spotted leaves, and where it's in full sun, not a bit of it. It's a little pink flowered, little 3-petaled pink flowers. They're okay, but really from 10 feet away, you don't notice them too much in the foliage, because the foliage is so nice and purple. Great for just popping in the garden and letting it weave around other things and cover open ground. It's semi-evergreen. I think it's best if you cut it back pretty good by late winter, but you can leave it up. Yeah, I did have a goal to actually have like a list of the plants today, except for when the first Tuesday of the month falls on the first day of the month, it always throws me off. So didn't realize till a little bit later than I'd planned that I had this tour. There's another plant that is widely used, and people don't think about it, but it is really pretty deer resistant. This is Abelia grandiflora. This particular one is kaleidoscope, but there are a lot of selections out there. Variegated ones, unvariegated ones, dwarf ones, bigger ones. And it's a great plant, Abelia grandiflora. It's evergreen for us here in the south. It gets a little more deciduous as you get farther north with it. There are forms that can get pretty good size, 5 or 6 feet tall, but then there are little ones that stay under 2 feet. Little Richard is a good dwarf one. They flower over extended periods. The flowers kind of fade in on this particular one because it's so brightly variegated, but you get little white flowers that the bees absolutely love. And then they're held by little kind of rosy pink bracts. So on the green leaf ones, you get these white flowers, and then the flowers fall, and you get these pink bracts that last for months on the plant that are really pretty attractive. You know, they look like little pink flowers on there over a long period. And it'll kind of come in and out of bloom. It does a big bloom in the spring, and then it'll kind of it'll flower a little bit all through the summer. Kaleidoscope is real brightly variegated. It's a great name for it because the color changes over the course of the season. In the winter, you get really bright oranges and reds instead of that yellow. And then in the spring, it's really kind of chartreusey yellow with the new growth coming out kind of pinky red and the green in there. Over the summer, it gets a little bit more of yellow with this pinkish cast. It just kind of changes all year round. For some people, this is a god-awful plant. They would never want this in their garden. I'm tacky, I like it. But there are plain green ones that are just as good. The green ones tend to go kind of a little plummy purple in the winter, the foliage on them does. They're real tough. You can cut them back hard. There's a lot of the forms that you can grow they'll grow like this. They'll be nice, and then they'll throw out these long, tall shoots. You just go in there and cut those out, and they're fine. Real easy plants, and deer tend to stay away from them. Best in full sun, but they'll tolerate some shade. They'll just get a little more open and leggy in the shade. You know, the classic tough plant, you know, the plant you get for wherever you can't grow something else, cast iron plant, Aspidistra, is a great one for deer resistance. It's hard to beat. This one, we actually have it labeled wrong. It should be Aspidistra sichuanensis. This is one we collected in Sichuan that has really bright spots on the leaves. We'll try and bulk that up and get that into some nurserymen's hands because it's a really nice plant. Aspidistra, you know, I learned it up in the mountains as a house plant. You know, we called it a cast iron plant or barroom plant because it's the only plant that would live in a bar. It would, you know, never get any light, and people would pour the rest of their beer in there and put their cigarettes out in there, and it would still live. It really is a tough plant. If you abuse it, they look terribly ugly.
If the deer don't eat it, is it the rabbits that eat it?
Rabbits might snip it off. I mean, you can always tell when it's rabbits because they don't actually eat the stupid things. They just nip it off and leave it laying on the ground there beside it. If you're seeing that, that's rabbits. God, they're irritating. And I did see a rabbit out here this morning. I used to shoot rabbits at Atlanta Botanic Garden. I used to come in early in the morning and
You come to
shoot
my
them.
house?
I got them in my house. My wife sends me pictures of the cute bunnies and deer in front of our new house. 6 deer in my front yard. She's sending me cute pictures of them. So Aspidistra are interesting plants. How many people have seen a flower on an Aspidistra? They flower at the base of the plant, and they are weird looking flowers. I mean, it's like little starfishy kind of looking things. They look like something alien at the base of the plant. But they're kind of blend in with they're kind of maroony red a lot of times, sometimes greenish, but they really, you don't notice them down there unless you look. And they tend to flower better in containers. If they're really pot bound, you tend to get more flowers on them. But nobody looks at the flowers. They're just kind of an oddity. Aspidistra, you know, they'll make nice clumps. They'll slowly spread, form bigger and bigger clumps over time. They are evergreen for us. I learned this trick from Cindy Watson at Cam2 Nursery. I had never known this. I always wondered why I couldn't get my Aspidistra to grow to good size. And what she told me was if you cut them back over the winter before the new growth has come up, they will stay smaller. They'll grow to about half the height of their potential. Whereas if you let the new growth come up and get to be about half as tall as it's ultimately going to get, say it should be a 3-foot plant, if you let it come up and get to 1.5 feet, 2 feet before you cut out the old foliage, then it'll get taller. Now, that also means though that you have to go in there and snip out each stem by itself, so you got to decide whether it's worth it or not. I do recommend getting rid of the old foliage at least every couple of years because they'll look really ratty if you don't do that. You get all that old ugly foliage. So if you're you know, lazy like me, I just live with short aspidistra. I stopped trying to put them behind other things and move them forward, because they do put out their growth pretty late in the season. So it's, you know, you're coming out in June and snipping out the old stalks in there. They can be really pretty. They're gorgeous ones. If you don't like the spotted look, a lot of times people say that looks like it's diseased. There are beautiful ones with that are just solid green, or that have gold stripes in them, or the tips are white. Really some beautiful, beautiful plants. And they're tough and long-lived, and will grow in deep, dark, dry shade once they're established. So that's always good. Right, go ahead. What's your question?
I was going to say it looks kind of like mother-in-law's tongue.
It does look a bit like mother-in-law's tongue, the Sansevieria, which is not hardy for us here and has is thicker textured. But yeah, it does give you that kind of that same look. If we could get these with those little bands across there, or just a solid edge on there, that would be great. Any other questions about? Yep.
I've seen this grown in a parking lot over at the Triangle J building.
Mm-hmm.
In full sun.
Yeah, in full sun, they tend to burn and look ugly. You can grow them in full sun if you give them water. The other thing, when they're grown in like parking lots and commercial places like that, they typically don't cut them back because it's evergreen. And like a lot of our evergreen perennials, think epimediums, hellebores, it'd be nice if they were deciduous, because you got the foliage all winter, that's great, but then if you leave it, they start to look ratty. And in parking lot, they just never cut them back, and so you've got 3, 4, 5, 10 years of old dead stalks in there. And so it doesn't matter how good the new growth looks, you get all that brown dead stuff in there, and they really should cut them back. But you know, they plant them because they're evergreen, don't have to do anything with them, so they look bad. But in full sun, they look worse than in shade when you do that. They really brown up. Okay, I mentioned ferns. I'm just going to talk about, I'll mention one true fern and another one while we're standing here in the shade. This is Blechnum chilense. This is a South American fern. It's real kind of tough, leathery leaves on there, but even the nice soft ferns, the deer tend to stay away from. If you have a big patch of ferns and a lot of deer, they do love sleeping in ferns, especially the softer ferns. They probably wouldn't like to sleep in this one. This is one that we were kind of just toying with to see if it would work. They grow it all over on the West Coast, but it's a little bit tougher here in the East Coast for us. We weren't sure if it was going to live at all because it's kind of marginally hardy. It's been good so far. Hasn't been in the ground for terribly long, but it'll spread to form a nice patch where it's real happy. If you plant it in moist soils in San Francisco, it can get 5 feet tall. We'll be real interested to see what it does here on the East Coast, if it'll grow tall like that. My guess is no. I think it's going to stay as a pretty low plant, but it does seem to be spreading. It was one plant that was planted, and you know, it's spreading here. I actually think this was the original plant, so the original plant kind of died, but the suckers have spread. We'll see what it does, but kind of a cool plant. There are Blechnums that are native here. We usually call them deer ferns, but this is kind of a bigger one. They say that in the best forms, the new growth comes out kind of reddish. We haven't seen that on our plants yet, but we'll see as it settles in whether maybe it does that. The other one, a fern relative, real primitive plant. This is a Selaginella. We have some native Selaginellas here. This is Selaginella pallida. Most people look at them and say fern, but they're even more primitive than that, and they'll spread to form nice patches of this really soft textured foliage. Deer would probably love to lay down in that, but they won't eat it. Good for damp spots in the shade, and there are several different ones out there, Selaginellas you can grow that are real easy plants once they're established, and you know, really pretty showy.
Do ferns in general want moist shade or dry shade, or some depends?
Do ferns in general want moist shade, dry shade, or it depends? It depends. It always depends. There are some ferns that are great for dry shade. most ferns are going to want, you know, a moist, well-drained woodland soil, which is what we all want. So yeah, I mean, they're going to be better off with more moisture than less in general. But then there are ferns that grow in the desert that won't tolerate water at all, that really want it bone dry. You know, so there's a little of everything. But if you don't know, give it nice moist shade. A correction for me. He remembered where I actually heard about cutting aspidistras back, and it makes more sense too. Judith Tyler, who passed away, but she was with Pine Knot Farms, and they do hellebores and have a lot of experience in shade gardening, so that makes more sense than the campaign. Illicium. This is our one of our native Illiciums, Illicium parviflorum. Anise tree, anise bush, sometimes called. It's a relative. Illicium is the star anise we use culinarily. Our natives are poisonous. Don't use them culinarily, but it is what we know of as star anise is an Illicium. Illicium are evergreen shrubs. They're mainly from the southeastern North America, Mexico, and Asia is where they come from. And they are evergreen shrubs that are really surprisingly deer resistant. They're about as close to a shrub as close to deer proof as you can get in the shrub. And there are a lot of different ones out there. They're really gaining popularity now, in large part due to their deer resistance. We've been collecting them and amassing more and more of them to evaluate. This is kind of just a ho-hum one. Illicium parviflorum has small yellowy green flowers. It's not overly showy in flower. The other native southeastern Illicium floridanum has really pretty red flowers, big red star-like flowers. There's also white forms of that one. The Asian ones the one we grow most often is Illicium anisatum, which also has nice red or white flowers. There are some other species with yellow flowers. You don't see them real often. They haven't proven to be fantastic plants for us so far. We have a little trouble keeping them alive and getting them to grow, although they should grow fine for us. Just we haven't figured them out.
Yellow one that's in the north shade. The
The real yellow leafed one.
Yeah.
The real yellow leafed one is an Illicium floridanum called Illicium parviflorum called Florida Sunshine. That was found by Tony Avent down at a big wholesale nursery in Florida. There's a new yellow-leafed one called Banana Peel. That is Banana Appeal. Terrible. That's supposed to be a little bit smaller. The Florida Sunshine, if you've ever purchased that, bright gold leaves, but it's floppy. As a young plant, it wants to kind of lay around. As it gets older, it gets a little bit sturdier, but it's terrible as a young plant. Just flops all over the place. You really got to cut it back hard a couple times to get it going. Supposedly the Banana Peel is better than that. We haven't grown it long enough to actually know. You can see the flower, the seed pods. You can see that it is very closely related to actual culinary star anise. It's very similar, and in each of these, as these age, it'll turn brown and they'll split open, and there's one seed inside each of those. They're royal pain to clean seeds of if you collect it. But just a really nice plant. Parviflorum will get big. You can whack it back hard. It'll come back up from the ground. There are some dwarf forms now. There's a real tiny one called Swamp Hobbit that's hard to come by, but there's two new ones that have just been released by NC State's own Tom Ranney. One called Scorpio with the big red flowers from Floridanum, and one with big white flowers called Orion. And those are dwarf ones. They're going to grow about 3 feet tall and 5 feet wide, so little short squatty plants. They've just been released this year. They're not really much available yet, but they will be soon. Nurseries have them.
Where would they be available?
They'll be available all over North Carolina. This is an introduction with the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association. So at the winter trade show, a lot of nurseries had nice big plants. So I know they're doing cuttings and bumping up numbers as quick as possible. And it seems to be a good grower. So hopefully we'll see it real soon. Maybe as soon as this fall. I don't know. Other questions? Oh, one thing I didn't mention, Illicium. In full sun, it grows great. And you see it's kind of got a yellowy green color cast to it. You get it in shade, still grows great, a little bit more open, but it'll get a much darker green color. They're just really good, rock solid, easy plants in the landscape, sun, shade, wet, dry, and deer resistant to boot. So great landscape plants. Okay, those of you who come on my tours with any regularity have probably heard me talk about this plant because it's one of my favorite plants. It goes by the lovely name of Aca Sellowiana, formerly Phaeoha Sellowiana, which was a little bit nicer. But Aca Sellowiana is a South American shrub or small tree. Grows in like Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, Chile. With this nice kind of mid-green leaf. It's got a little bit of silvery blue hairs on there, and then the back sides of the leaves are real silvery. Some are more blue on top than others, but they just make, to me, really pretty plants. This is one that's we call NCSU hardy. It's a little bit hardier form. Some of the forms can be iffy for us, especially some of the ones that are done for fruit. I put this on here because so many of our fruiting trees and shrubs, the deer love. So it's nice because this is one that is edible that the deer don't love. Now, if you get in here close, you can see some fruit being formed. These little round guys here. When it's ripe, they'll be a little smaller than an egg, a chicken egg. On the best forms, on ones like this that aren't necessarily grown specifically for their fruit, they're probably a little bit smaller. I think a songbird egg. They're real tasty. They're kind of, they call it pineapple guava because it tastes like a cross between pineapple and guava, and mint, a little bit of mint in there. They're really tasty though. Kind of a gritty texture, which some people don't like, but they really taste good. They've got a big seed in there. Or several seeds. But they're really good. They often don't fruit for us. There's a couple things there. One, some of them are relatively infertile, so you need multiple different ones to pollinate. The winter cold can kill the flower buds that they're going to come out the following late spring. So that can do it. And sometimes the fruit will drop if they're too extended temperatures over 90 degrees. So, that makes it tough for us. But the flowers are beautiful. They're kind of pale pink petals with red stamens coming out. And what's cool about them is the petals themselves. You pull off the petals, they're kind of thick and waxy, and they are delicious. They're sweet and tasty. I have eaten a lot of edible flowers, and most of them are just that. They are edible. These actually taste good. We usually show the interns, and then you'll come by, and there'll just be little masses of stamens out here because they've eaten all the petals off of all the flowers out here. Flowers in late spring. It's really beautiful flower, especially against that kind of blue foliage. And the foliage is even bluer when it first comes out. I love it. And so, my experience, I haven't seen it on any lists, but my experience, another fruiting plant, pomegranate, is the deer don't tend to go after pomegranates too hard. So that's another good one. So if you get away from our more traditional fruits and into some of these other ones, seem to have better luck with keeping the deer away. You grow this often as a shrub, but it can be limbed up into a tree. I've seen really beautiful ones that have been really, pruned to give that kind of dome shape, very formal look. That's really nice. Otherwise, they can kind of go wild. Very drought tolerant once established, but you're more likely to lose fruit if it's too dry and too hot. So, I don't know. I don't remember ever seeing fruit on this since I've been here. At least not get ripe. So this is really loaded with fruit. So I'm going to be interested to see if we get good fruiting on there. I had actually never tasted one until about a year or two ago, and one that I had planted 12 or 15 years ago up in coastal Virginia. I was walking by and it was absolutely loaded with fruit. So I was like, oh great, I'll finally get to taste it. And boy, it was delicious. Really was good. The flesh, not so much. You kind of squeeze it out and whatever. But yeah, very good. Acca, A-C-C-A, Celowiana. Pineapple guava. If you get it, pineapple guava. It is somewhat difficult to come by often because it doesn't root. It's very popular in New Zealand, and I was visiting a nursery in New Zealand, and they had a ton of it, and they had different named varieties, like different for fruit, different named varieties. And I asked them what their secret was for getting it to root, because we'll stick 100 and we'll get 2, 3, 5. If we're lucky, maybe we'll get 10. Not real good. And what he said was, oh, we just stick thousands and thousands of them, and they said they get about 25 to 30% take on them, and they do a lot. So low percentages. A lot of folks just don't even want to mess with that. A lot of nurseries, but you can find it, especially through mail order. And I'd say seek it out. It's great.
Is that as big as it gets?
It can get larger. Around here, you don't see it much larger than that, and it will in a really cold winter. It can get knocked back really hard. It is hardy for us, but not, zone 8, you go just a little bit farther south and you got no problems with it. But in Florida, I've got some pictures at Disney World of this, with a trunk like this and, kind of like this size, in the ground, and it's beautiful like that, with a single trunk, and it really is gorgeous. You tend to get multiple trunks is how it grows naturally, and especially here, if it gets peeled back, it sends out more trunks. Other questions? All right, well, that is it for me. Hope you enjoyed it. Happy to answer any other questions you have.